Welcome back to episode 85 of No Truce Barred, the best up and coming podcast on the internet. And I'm your host, Hoy Kawaku Timmons. And I want to thank you for joining me for another episode. No Truce Barred is the premier podcast for intellectual study, subject matter, history, philosophy. And so we engage in a lot of those topics on this platform. And if you've missed any of the previous 84 episodes, those episodes can be found on YouTube and Spotify. Letting you guys know the podcast will no longer be available on SoundCloud. So if you want to follow the newest content with the podcast, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is the No Truce Barred YouTube channel. And also make sure you follow the podcast on Spotify. And also make sure you follow the Instagram page, which is the THE_ No Truce Barred podcast. I want to jump into today's podcast. Today, I have a guest on who is a person that I deeply revere, a serious researcher, a brilliant historian, activist, who's dedicated many years of his life to studying the culture of African people, not just on the continent, but throughout the diaspora. He's played many vital roles in many activists and grassroots organizations. He's been a professor in several different institutions. One of the most brilliant and friendly and kind-hearted individuals that I've ever encountered. I want to introduce to you today a person who I consider a great scholar and a former professor of mine, but I consider myself a consummate student, so I'm always learning from this gentleman right here. Today I have on Professor Saleh Adeyemi. Professor Adeyemi, I thank you deeply for coming on today's episode. So I kind of provided just a synopsis about you. If you want to add on, just kind of like so much to add to the intro about yourself, so please feel free.
Okay, greetings, White. Again, thank you. And it's a pleasure being on your program once more. I don't know that I want to add too much, just that I've been involved in teaching for a number of decades of research, I've written, and I've been involved, like you said, in many different organizations. I want to just get right into the topics and, maybe along the way, some of what I've done in the past will come out, throughout the conversation.
Yes, sir. And once again, a lot of modesty there. A lot of stuff he's done, y'all. A lot. But one of the things I want to jump into today is because if you know me, if you follow my platform, you know that I reference such figures in history that deal with Pan-Africanism. So I may talk about Henry Sylvester Williams. I may talk about Edward Wilmot Blyden. I've definitely done a lot as it pertains to Marcus Garvey. So I've actually done a few lectures here and there on Marcus Garvey. So I always have the perspective that if you look at Black people throughout the diaspora or African people throughout the diaspora, so whether you're looking in the Caribbean, whether you're looking at Afro-Mexicans, Africans that during the slave trade would have ended up in Mexico, if you're looking at Black people here throughout the United States, we're all facing a lot of similar issues due to oppression, due to systemic racism. If you're looking on the continent, colonialism, neocolonialism. And I think that one of the pragmatic tools, I'm not saying that it's the only solution, but I think one of the pragmatic tools that we all really should study, those of us who are researchers, those who are activists, et cetera, is the idea or the ideology and the definition politically as well of Pan-Africanism. So I want to just kind of give you my general view of Pan-Africanism, and then I want Professor Adeyemi to provide a more structured and informed view of it. So my just kind of superficial view of Pan-Africanism based upon the research I've done is that when you're looking at African people who've been dispersed throughout the diaspora, when you're looking at African people on the continent, we have a lot of commonalities as far as situations we face economically, various forms of oppression. Keep in mind, the UNIA was not only big in places like New York, but it was big here in places like Virginia and throughout the South. I think Hampton Roads had 48 chapters of the UNIA, but it also was huge on the continent of Africa and the Caribbean. So the way I look at Pan-Africanism is that it's an ideology that can galvanize a unity, whether you're from New York, Richmond, Virginia, or Jamaica or Africa, because we're all dealing with a lot of similar issues. So that's my very rudimentary definition of Pan-Africanism. And I just kind of wanted you to give the listeners a more historically sound definition of that concept, Professor Adeyemi.
Well, there's usually no universally accepted definition. You look at various texts, you find an assortment of definition. But I think that there's some major components that one can point to that helps to define Pan-Africanism. One, for all people of African descent, they view Africa as the ancestral homeland of all people of African descent. You find a common history among people of African descent, be it on the African continent or in the African diaspora. And by the diaspora, again, just for the audience, we're talking about African communities outside of the African continent. Anywhere you have them, that's part of the African diaspora. So the unity of people of African descent who have there's a common history of enslavement, colonialism, in some instances neocolonialism, oppression, racial discrimination. Whether you're in North America, you're in the Caribbean, that's part of your history, right? You suffer from racism, colonialism. In some instances, hey, in America, some people refer to this as a sort of internal colonialism. But you're oppressed, nevertheless. Enslavement, wherever we are in the Western diaspora, you have a history of enslavement by white colonizers, white slave masters for the most part. There's a pride in African culture, right? Pride in African culture, belief in the African personality, right? In other words, there's a unique African personality, first elaborated on by Edward Wilmot Biden, then Nkrumah took it up, among others. Also, if you look at a number of different texts, right, that I looked at, I'm going to share a few of the various definitions with the hopes that people might get a clearer understanding of Pan-Africanism, right? The African Union, on their 50th anniversary, put forth a definition. Their definition went like this: Pan-Africanism is an ideology and movement that encourage the solidarity of Africans worldwide. It aims to unify and uplift people of African descent. It asserts that the fate of all African peoples and countries are intertwined. There's a belief that all African peoples, both on the continent and the diaspora, share a common history and a common destiny. Then there's the next definition here: belief in the unity, common history, common purpose of the peoples of Africa and the African diaspora, and the notion that their destinies are interconnected. A concern with the social, economic, cultural, and political emancipation of African peoples. And then Adeyemi, in his book on Pan-Africanism, he talks about how it seeks to regenerate and unify Africa, promote the feeling of oneness among the people of the African world, and pride in African values. So that should give you some sense of Pan-Africanism. Basically, to me, it talks of the solidarity of African people. It talks of African people helping other African people. And as you know, when one looks at the Pan-African movement, one sees African people wherever they are, on the continent, in the diaspora, have benefited from this movement. When you look at organized Pan-Africanism, for example, you have the major congresses and conference. First one started with Henry Sylvester Williams in 1900 in London. You look at the international conferences by the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and you look at all these international Pan-African conferences, and you see African people from various parts of the African world coming together, putting the minds together and coming up with ideas, strategies, activities that benefit all of us. For example, if we look at the most important Pan-African Congress, according to most scholars, would be the 5th Pan-African Congress, 1945 in Manchester, England, right? Coming out of that conference, you had Africans from the continent, from in the United States, from in the Caribbean, from Latin America, and so forth. It would be the first of the Pan-African Congresses where you would have a large number of working class people being represented by unions, student groups, and so forth, instead of a more elitist Congress like those that were held before. And in that conference, the delegates came up with a plan that will lead to political independence for African peoples, both on the African continent and in the diaspora, right? Leading in that conference, for example, Kwame Nkrumah went back to Ghana in 1947 and will lead a movement that ended up with Ghana becoming the first African nation south of the Sahara to regain its political independence, right? In 58, you would have Guinea and other countries getting that independence. 1960 will be the year of Africa when over 16 African countries regained their political independence. And at the same time in the Caribbean, coming out again of the 5th Pan-African Congress, you would see countries in the Caribbean beginning with Jamaica and Trinidad. In 1962, political independence, followed later by places like Barbados, Guyana, among other places. So we all benefited from that. And then this movement towards political independence in Africa would also impact the civil rights struggle going on here in America, right? It would give inspiration to activists here, among other things. So we all have benefited from Pan-Africanism.
Mm-hmm. That's something that a few months ago I actually came across some information about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he spoke in reverence towards Kwame Nkrumah. You know, he spoke highly of the things that Nkrumah was doing in Ghana. And so, you know, that information, it also allowed me to understand, you know, not just with people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you know, you can even look at, you know, like a Malcolm X as well. His parents, I believe they were members of the UNIA. Yeah. So it's a global impact. And it's an impact on us here in the United States. It's an impact on Africans as well, not just in the United States, but also in the West Indies. The other thing I wanted to ask you related to Pan-Africanism is, I mentioned Garvey earlier, and he's a person, whenever, you know, amongst many circles, if I say the name Marcus Garvey, he's almost synonymous with that term, you know, but there are many other powerful figures within Pan-Africanism, not just Garvey. Right. But well, I wanted to ask you, a lot of times we have this kind of nostalgia with wanting to regurgitate the past, hook, line, and sinker. When you look at the material conditions of the world currently and what we're encountering as African people dispersed all over the globe, one, do you think that a movement like the UNIA movement could occur in this day and time? Could a massive Pan-African movement that involved many of us across the globe arise in this current climate? Do you think it's even possible for those of us who may have a Pan-African ideology? Could something, not saying it has to be identical to the UNIA, but could something equivalent possibly rise now in 2022?
If we're going to regain as African people our rightful place in the world where we are seen and treated as equals, that is not the case right now. If that is to happen, I think some sort of Pan-Africanism, right, is the only option for the most part. It's the only option. You're talking about us developing a movement developing a Pan-African ideology that informs our behaviors and our action and guide our action. Only Pan-Africanism, because outside of Pan-Africanism, you know, be left with some sort of micro-nationalism, maybe a regional kind of nationalism. And I don't think that can pull us together as a people. Some sort of Pan-Africanism is the only option I think we have if we will ever regain our rightful place, if we are to ever unify Africa, for example. It has to be done through some sort of Pan-Africanism. It cannot be this narrow nationalism that exists today. It has to be a nationalism, a broader level of nationalism, which will be Pan-Africanism. Is it easy? Is it easy to do? It's very challenging. We are living in a world totally different from the time of the UNIA. You are living in a world where people talks about cyberspace, cybersecurity. You know, I had a discussion with someone a few months ago, and I was asking him, you know, given the kind of technology that exists today, do you think the liberation movements in Southern Africa and West Africa in the 60s and 70s, do you think they could be that successful today? Because you're looking at drone technology, you're looking at cyberspace, you're looking at cybersecurity, we're looking at a level where we as African people, as the African continent, as African nation, we are not players at all in what's going on in that cyberspace world. You know, it's called the fifth domain, and you're looking at players like North Korea, Iran, Russia, the United States, China, and they have basically like a third world war going on right now in cyberspace, where they would disrupt the other one, parts of the other one financial system, disrupt the power grid, disrupt the hospital. I mean, disrupt the transportation system. You could say from anywhere here in America, and you can target someone anywhere in Africa. So, you know, those liberation movements, what wage guerrilla struggles in Guinea-Bissau, in Mozambique and Angola and so forth. What would happen with the drone technology that they have today? What would happen? So we are, and that's only with the military aspect of war that we are talking about, the struggle. I'm saying the financial, they have the capability in cyberspace to just disrupt your financial system, your system to run your hospital, to run your banks and financial institutions. I mean, we are not players in that world at all. You know, they are using our mineral resources, yes, right, to administer that world, right? For example, the coltan that comes out of the Congo is one of the most valuable mineral resource in the world today. It's used in aerospace, it's used in the cell phone, the laptop, all of these things. But you have civil war, dysfunctional government in the Congo, and this allow all kind of gangsters, so to speak, to take the coltan and sell it on the black market, illegal market, and that sort of thing. And we are not benefiting from it. So I'm saying, yes, Pan-Africanism is our only hope to me, but it's going to be difficult and challenging to develop it on a level, on a scale that it is needed to be effective, to liberate our people and put us in a position to maintain control over our destiny, over our lives, over our resources, and so forth. It has to be some sort of Pan-Africanism, because without Pan-Africanism, we are just used by every other power base and power people.
Yeah.
We are simply used. I mean, let's take here in America, for example. In America, and sometimes you talk with people and they would say that our issue is economics and finance. If we can get our economics and finance together, we'll be all right. People will respect us and so forth. Right. Okay. African Americans have, the last time I checked, African Americans have a spending power of about $1.6 trillion.
Yeah.
That's the kind of money they have. When you look at the countries of the world, if you look at the gross national income of all the countries, the nations of the world, the African Americans would be like maybe about 12 or 13 in that lineup
Wow.
out of over 200 countries in the world. So what I'm saying, so there's money there, but because we don't have the ideology that let us see ourselves as part of a nation, an African nation, and we have an obligation and responsibility to protect that nation, to serve that nation. Unless we can see ourselves in that sort of mode, we're in trouble. I mean, it's just like China. When I was a youngster growing up, China was just walked all over. There was no respect for China. And look at China today, by the Chinese coming together, waging their war, developing a strong China nation. China is now highly respected. It's perhaps the second most powerful country in the world, if not the first, right now, right? And again, the Chinese did that. They had the Chinese Revolution. Of course, they had an ideology. They used Marxist-Leninism in a Chinese context. They use that to bring their nation together, because you definitely need an ideology. And the
Yeah.
ideology, like I said, is Pan-Africanism. But when you look at Pan-Africanism, you have to look. I was looking at some of Rodney's work, right? And Rodney was very critical of a sort of elitist Pan-Africanism. You see what I'm saying? He was looking at all those countries in Africa that had gotten their political independence, but were led by the petty bourgeois, an elite group, right? And even though sometimes they claim some sort of Pan-Africanism, basically they were just serving and administering a nation that was very oppressive to the vast majority of African people in that particular nation, right? Like I said, multinational from Western countries, the United States and so forth, were exploiting the mineral resources, exploiting the human resources and so forth. And they were governing this petty bourgeois elite, African petty bourgeois elite was governing over those kind of nations, right? Some of them sometimes claim Pan-Africanism. They change the name. If they had a European name, they change the name to an African name. They start to wear African traditional clothing. They change up the names, get rid of the European names of the African countries and areas in Africa, and Africanize those names and so forth. But at the end of the day, to create the kind of socio-political system that will benefit the masses of their people, they never embraced that kind of system. They never advocated that kind of system. They basically continue with a neo-colonial capitalist society that benefited multinationals and foreign countries, but not their people. So Rodney talks about a Pan-Africanism that is led by a progressive and revolutionary leadership whose main concern is the interest and well-being of the masses, the vast masses of African people, and not just a small elite group of people. And you could look at even places like in the United States where this is not an African country, but you have African communities, you have an African population, and you find a similar thing. You find a lot of the elected officials are very much like the elected officials in the Caribbean, in Africa. They are part of a petty bourgeois elite that they enjoy good, pretty decent benefit, salaries, perks, and so forth. But the way they govern is not in the best interest of the majority of African people. And that's the key question we got to deal with. So Pan-Africanism, yes, but a sort of revolutionary Pan-Africanism that advocates policies that benefits the masses, the working class and grassroots of our people, and not a neo-colonial or colonial society with a petty bourgeois, Black or African elite that benefits outsiders, foreigners, foreign corporations, but not our people, the majority of our people.
You made a lot of valid points. And one of the things that I've seen is kind of this splintering within the Pan-African ideology, because you brought up a really great point. You're going to have some people that are going to orient the solutions around a sort of African-centered or Black-focused form of capitalism as being the solution. So if we can get all of us get like our own businesses, buy land, buy property, this is the answer. Now, to a degree, I do understand that. But I think that the caveat there you mentioned is that when you looked at these independent African countries, you still saw the elitism that was imposed kind of in a different, done with a Black face in front of it. And so I guess my problem, my critique to the people that are super Black capitalism focused, can you do that without the element of elitism and exploitation? Is it possible to use certain tools from a Black capitalist Pan-African perspective, but omit the elitism, omit, kind of unintentionally assimilated to that idea of being part of the petty bourgeoisie, and omit the exploitation? Is it possible to do that, in your opinion, for those Black people that say we can use a Black-oriented form of capitalism as the solution to our problem?
Okay, before I answer that, I want to go to Julius Nyerere. Julius Nyerere, back in, I think it's the 1970s, he gave an address to the Sudanese, a Sudanese socialist organization, right? And the address was entitled The Rational Choice. And in The Rational Choice, Nyerere pointed out that there were only two ways to organize your society. There might be variations of those two ways, but basically there are two ways. In other words, your economic system is a system where you look at the system of the production and distributions of all the goods and services in a society. That's your economic system. The system that produces and distributes all the goods, every good and service provided in that society, right? He says there are only two ways to organize a system. Either one where the people owns the means of production that produces all those goods and services, or one where a small, powerful elite, this is a capitalist system, owns the means of production. Whereas even though the people create the wealth through the labor and through the work, mentally, physically, and so forth, the people who own the means of production and get the lion's share of the wealth that is produced is a small, powerful capitalist group, versus a system where the means of productions, your minerals, your major corporations and everything are owned by the people in various ways. It can be done in various ways, where the state or government own certain sectors of that economy. You could have cooperatives, you could have joint ventures owning some parts of that economy. That's one way. Or one way a small, powerful group of capitalists own that economy. Now he says you can have variation of both, but when you look, there are just these two ways. We are in a situation where, let's take Africans in America. In a powerful capitalist society, is Black capitalism the answer to the problems of the African community in America? I don't think so. However, as long as you live here and you live in this capitalist society, we have to make some effort to exercise some degree.
Okay, sorry, we had some technical difficulties, good people. But Professor Adeyemi was just about to touch on, when we were discussing Pan-Africanism and those that kind of hold the view that you can use a Black capitalism-oriented approach to solving the issues that a lot of Africans are facing, not just here in the US, but throughout the diaspora. And I know Professor Adeyemi was going to give his take on that sort of perspective, and what are some of the possible applicable things that sort of solution provide to us? And then what are some of the erroneous things as well that that sort of mentality may have?
Okay, was into, as Nair pointed out, is a very exploitative system. You have these, for them to exist, they have to oppress large numbers of working people in the capitalist society.
Mm-hmm.
Their wealth comes from exploiting the majority of workers in the society. So do we want to be part of that? We who have been enslaved, colonized, and so forth, do we want to buy into a system that oppresses and exploits our brothers and sisters or the rest of us, and just hope that we are one of the lucky ones that can make it successfully in the capitalist society? No. However, we have to live, right now, the reality is that we are living in a capitalist society if we are here in the United States. The world is a capitalist world. There are a few socialists or a few countries attempting to develop socialism, right? But for the most part, the world is a capitalist world. The international infrastructure set up to deal with is basically and we have to, what should we do? Should we just focus society on aspect of the economy in that society? Okay, me ultimate goal is to transform these societies, transform the world to capitalist. You could give what you want, interested in a world where each respected, have equal opportunity to grow, develop, and live a decent life, decent healthcare.
Okay, I think I lost you.
Yeah, if you believe, you still have me now?
Okay, you're back. You're back.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, if you believe in that kind of world, then don't we have to work to bring that into reality. It can happen now. It's not going to happen now. So we are living in a capitalist society. I think it was Dubois who talked about African Americans developing an economy within the economy, or like a nation within the nation. And so, yes, just like many other groups, you have the Chinese and other groups here in America, they have the Chinatown and their own China economy. I think it's important that we look at and this will be, within this capitalist society, we as African people should have much more control over our economy, right? When I say our economy, over the entities that provides food and clothing, transportation, and so forth for us, we should have try to get as much control as possible over that as a group, right? But at the same time, there are a lot of non-capitalist economic business ventures that you have in this country that have gone under the radar. The mainstream media, which is capitalist, and that's something I want to get back to, because the reason we think the way we think, and most of us embrace this capitalist society, is because the media where we get our information from are huge, mega capitalist firms, right? And they control just about all the information provided in this society. So, I understand why many of us embrace capitalism and hope that we can make it and strike it rich and that sort of thing. But the system is not a good system. But anyway, so under the radar that the mainstream media don't cover is a number of cooperatives that you have right here in America, right? For example, I was looking at some information that says more than 130 million Americans are members of one or another cooperative, right? Some include agricultural co-ops dating back to 1930s, electrical co-ops, insurance co-ops, retail co-ops, healthcare co-ops, artist co-ops, credit unions, etc. A number of co-ops are high-tech and innovative, like the Isthmus Engineering and Manufacturing Company in Madison, Wisconsin, which has been a cooperative for more than 30 years and specializes in precision robotic assembly machinery, right? Then you have, in that same city, you have a cab company with over 200 worker owners, and they have revenues of over $7 million, right?
Wow.
And next one I'll share with you. Okay, in North Carolina, right next door to us in North Carolina, there's Sun Hills Farm to Table Cooperative that brings farmers, consumers, and workers together in a food production and distribution system that delivers locally grown food to 1,250 households. That's a co-op right next door. You have the Appleton Company is a large paper product manufacturer that has been employee-owned since 2001. In 2010, the net sales was 850 million. So we, you know, as a people collectively, we need to look at some of these non-capitalist form of businesses that exist right here, and there are many others exist right here in America. We need to look at some of those for one thing. In some instances, we just have to engage in capitalist. We'll have to own some capitalist enterprises, but I think we still need to have the ideology that make us different to the regular capitalist who's interested in making us and getting as wealthy as possible, right? You can run a capitalist business, but you run it in a socially responsible way, where, for example, there are some businesses, there's a type of investment corporation that you have right in America, where they are obligated to make some profit, but invest some of the profit back into the community in socially responsible entities. And we can look at this sort of thing. In other words, you can be involved in a capitalist business, but you're not interested in becoming a Jeff Bezos or the wealthiest person in America. You're looking at how you can use it to help advance your people, right? So it's not about you getting wealthy. It's about you making some money, yes, so you can survive and live good, but also taking some of that extra money and investing it in your community. So we need to look at those kind of ways, but I still think that down the road, we need to look at which is I mean, it's a tall mountain to climb, but we need to look at a non-capitalist kind of nation that we're interested in attaining at some point or fighting for at some point. I want to share one other thing along that. I was looking at the Nordic countries. You have what is called the Nordic middle, right?
Yeah.
They are not capitalists. They are not socialists, hardcore socialists, but they are called like middle of the road, right? So I shouldn't say they are not capitalists. They are capitalists, but the capitalism is very, very much regulated, right? So Sweden, for example, in Sweden, everyone gets a pension. And your pension is about 70% of your salary when you work is your pension after you retire. If you have never worked, you still get a guaranteed income in Sweden. Childcare, which is privatized here in America, right? If you're working and you have children, you got to pay for childcare. Childcare is paid for in Sweden, right? Healthcare is socialized in Sweden. Education, right up to the highest level, is socialized in Sweden. So some of the wealthy people in Sweden go to the public education institutions. So those are some kind of place you want to look at. We have Cuba, which is a more hardcore trying to develop a non-capitalist socialist type society, but it's much more hardcore than the Nordic countries. And we need to look at that, because even though Cuba is a poor country, because of the system that they have, you have socialized medicine, you have education, free education right up to the university level, and you have help with housing, among other things in Cuba. And Cuba is poor, but look what Cuba has done internationally, right? There's no country, there's no nation in the world that has had the back of African nations like Cuba.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
None. What I mean, the point, Cuba educate doctors that goes throughout the Caribbean, doctors throughout Africa, throughout Latin America. It's a poor country, but it's based on its philosophy. Its philosophy is either is non-capitalist. Cuba is not about making profit. It's about the well-being, the health and well-being of the people is number one. In the kind of society that I'm talking about, that we need to fight for, the health and well-being of human beings is more important than making profit, which is in a capitalist society. But the profit.
Yeah. And you one of the things I wanted to espouse here is that there's a certain mentality that comes, it's almost a residual effect of embracing. And like I said, I'm more on the fence, but I do see the ills of having this kind of like hyper or capitalistic oriented mentality. And one of those is that if you are able to reach a certain point, you know, let's say you are able to make $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year, you kind of develop this I did it, everybody needs to pull themselves up by their bootstraps mentality. And it causes us then, the same people where we were advocating this as a way to unify progress and improve our situation, we still develop that same mentality towards other Black folks that may not work in particular high-paying careers. But I wanted to go back to something you said, because I want to hear your rebuttal to this. When people point out those Nordic countries, and even when people point to this dichotomy between capitalism and socialism, one of the arguments people have made is that, well, you can look at these Nordic countries, but you're comparing these countries to a country that has 300 plus million people, and it may not be practical to try to implement those things here. So that's one thing that I've heard people say. The other part of that is, and we had a conversation about this, people say, well, look, what incentivizes people to be innovative, to create, to do business if you don't have that maximum profit there? How do you cultivate innovation in a sort of socialist or quasi-socialist paradigm? So I want to get your perspective on those two arguments.
Well, the key thing is education, right? If you get the kind of education that you get in a socialist country, in a Cuba, you going to naturally be more interested in helping your fellow human beings. Like, let's say the Cuban doctors who went to Haiti after the earthquake, they went out there, they went before the earthquake, they were there. They stayed out in the fields, they stayed out there where the Haitians were, those who were homeless and so forth, they stayed out there, put up the tents and stayed there with them. The Americans who came after, right, the American doctors, they stayed in the fancy hotel. And they left pretty soon. They didn't stay out in the fields with the Haitians and so forth. So what I'm saying is that you see a different type of human being. You see human beings who are concerned with helping the fellow human beings. They have this internationalist sort of outlook versus this capitalist where you individualistic notion. Cuba, for example, they have a fantastic biotechnology sector where they have, I think right now around the world, they've created about 1,800 patents of different type of medical devices and so forth, right? They're doing well in that area. Only India and Brazil, in terms of emerging countries, would be on the similar level with Cuba, right? If you look at all the other countries in the Caribbean, they're nowhere near that. Cuba been developing their own COVID-19 vaccination and that sort of thing. So I'm saying the whole biotech sector, which is a marvelous, which everyone marvels about. I mean, where was the incentive to get those people to create all those inventions in that sector?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But again, it's the education. We are, like I said, I wanted to bring in this point here because I look at this. In the United States, the 5 global dimension firms operating with the characteristics of a cartel. They own most of the newspapers, the magazines, the book publishers, the motion picture studios, radio and television stations in the US and so forth. Right? 5 major companies. In the world, there are about 9 that control just about all the information you get in the world, right? So you are bombarded with information from a capitalist perspective 24/7, 365 days a year, right? It's almost impossible unless you're looking for alternative sources of information, right? Progressive information, revolutionary information. Unless you're looking for those kind of information, the average person you run into in Richmond, in New York, in Jamaica, in Puerto Rico, he's going to be thinking capitalistic. He's going to be thinking individualistic. He would like to get rich and wealthy so he can have it made and that sort of thing, or she, and so forth. So you have this capitalist mentality. In capitalist society, there's a type of education, and you get the education through the formal institutions and through the informal institution. And everything goes towards promoting capitalism, which is a sort of individualism. And it's kind of almost fooling people that you can get wealthy. For every person that gets wealthy, what about the large numbers of being exploited and trampled upon so that a small number of people can become very wealthy, you know? So, you know, you have China, even though China has, just like Cuba, has recently incorporated some semblance of private sector companies into the economy, into their society, right? But China still is socialist oriented, and look how many people, over 1 billion people. If we talk about people, you know, when you mentioned people earlier, 300 million people in America. So I don't think it's the numbers of people, it's the will and the willingness to create a society that cares about human beings. And look, for us as African people, everything that we enjoy, access to education, right? Access to a halfway decent job or employment, to live in a halfway decent house. All these opportunities that we enjoy, we as African people here in America enjoy today, came because our ancestors, people before us, struggled, sacrificed, died for these opportunities. The slave master did not, or the capitalists, after chattel slavery ended, they did not look out for African people.
No.
Every opportunity and benefit that African people enjoy in this country came from struggle and sacrifice. They fought for this thing and people died for this. People died for this thing. So when you come from a background like that, why is it then do you want to become a wealthy person through the exploitation of those, the majority and the bottom? No, it seems to me that when you come from a background like that, you should have some sort of responsibility to your people. You say, okay, I was able to get an education. I get a decent enough job. The things I got, and then and beaten and jailed. I must have sort of responsibility my both before and after, and those who are coming after.
You're kind of freezing up.
It's a kind of society. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
it's unstable. I wonder. That's
yeah.
my thing.
Yeah, I think you kind of your screen kind of froze because it did that a little earlier. I think you had to adjust something real quick, and then you were like back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're back. I see you now. But
Okay, so
just to
you could,
interject something really,
yeah.
really quick. I think part of that, like you said, when you look at chattel slavery, you look at Jim Crow, you look at all of these different things. And then even when you get into people like Harriet Washington's work, Medical Apartheid,
Right.
Dr. Uzi's done some documentaries on the medical racism that Black people have experienced. I think, and I heard a brother in DC said this, I was out at Howard one time, and I think what this society does effectively is that it can sell, it has a good way to market hope. So in your mind, you look at Jeff Bezos and you don't see greed, you don't see exploitation, you see somebody to be like. You know, if I work hard enough, if I pull myself up by my bootstraps, I can be that. And it becomes this thing of, it almost feels like a mentality to me where you're looking at hope. And so I don't want to attribute this to Kwame Ture, but I feel like I heard him say this, and I'm going to butcher this and paraphrase it so wrongly. But I remember him saying that it's harder for certain movements and revolutions to take root here because a lot of people believe that they have a realistic opportunity to be part of the millionaire and the billionaire class. So they don't look at it as, hey, how are these small minority of people controlling so much? It's, if I work hard, I can be like them instead. That's with the mentality with a lot of people. It's that window, that hope. If I just work really, really hard, I can be the next Jeff Bezos. I can be the next Oprah. I can be the next this person and that person. And I think a lot of people have that mentality. And even on a lesser level, you see people that get into these high professional fields. And I met brothers and sisters like this, where once they get into a position where they're making over $100,000 a year, their first point of view is to turn around and look down on Black folks that may be your garbage men, that may be your bus drivers, that may be your bellhops, your waiters, your waitresses, as not working hard, as not being disciplined, as not being motivated, as accepting mediocrity. And so I just want to interject that I think it's a really toxic frame of mind to have.
Yeah, well, I think Julius Nyerere, in that same article that he gave to the Sudanese in early 70s, he talked about how people normally have this gambler instinct, that somehow they might be the one, to strike it rich. And so, yes, you have those. However, I think to a large extent is that education, that constant education in the formal and informal institutions. It makes it almost impossible for you to get around not liking some aspect of this capitalist system. But I want to go back. I'm going to go back way back to something that I observed personally that I just want to share as a youngster. You know, one of my favorite places is a little village in the British Virgin Islands named Carrot Bay, and I spent a lot of time there as a youngster, right? In that village, there was no electricity. There was no, I know it when there was no transportation. There was no bathroom, right? Or toilet and so forth. No electricity and those kind of things. And it seems to me the people in that village is one of my favorite places. And when they were farmers for the most part. They were farmers, but they did a lot of things. They were builders also, they were sailors, they were fishermen, they were farmers and so forth. When they were farming, right, most of the men had large farms up in the hillside. When they were if one individual was farming, a number of the other men in that village will go to that farm. When he was, let's say, when he was clearing the land, when he was cultivating, and when he was harvesting, and they used to have a lot of sugar canes. And when they were doing that, you know, there was a need for a large number of people. When you're clearing the land, when you're planting the canes, and then when you're harvesting. And a number of men from the village will go to this individual farm, and they were not paid. They were not paid for that. The only thing they were given is some food and drink. And then the women will cook the food and bring the food. Midday, they will bring the food and the drinks to the farm. and, and that was it. And then when one of those other farmers was doing the same thing on his farm, the other men from the village will come. When they were building houses, they will do the same thing. When they're building houses, they put it on the roof, they put it on the foundations and the walls and so forth. A number of men from the village will come and help. And they were not paid. If people are talking about incentive and money and so forth, they were not paid for that. And if you go to that island today or that village today, if you see the huge houses, you know, when I first knew that place, they had like the houses you have in Africa, thatch roof, thatch roof houses and wattle and dab houses. Then they went to like board and shingle roof and boards. And now, if you go in that community today, the problem is that the farms no longer exist, but they have these huge fancy houses that they build. If you look at, I marvel at the quality of workmanship, craftsmanship that these people, and they develop all this on their own. But I'm saying there was no monetary incentive at that time or material incentive as such. Today, that's not the situation today. Today, when you're building and support, you gotta pay people. You got to hire people and pay people and so forth. So that has changed. But yes, I think people can do a lot of things, and a lot of money is not the only thing that can incentivize people at times. I think if you have the right education, which makes you care about people, you understand your history, understand what people did for you, that you come into this world as a vulnerable, helpless little infant. And if people did not provide a hospital, did not provide homes, did not provide places for education and so forth for you, you would die. When you understand that kind of thing, that it means that you have some sort of obligation to those who did those things, provided those things for you. And I think if you're educated in that kind of way, I don't think, and the society is set up, organized differently also. The society would have to be organized differently, where profit is not the ultimate for everything, but the well-being of human beings. And I think human beings can create that kind of society, where the well-being, you have some African societies like that. Obati Shaka, in his book, he talks about the most equal societies in the world. He talks about the Twa people and the San people as being very, very equal in their society. And it's not about money and its material incentive and that sort of thing. So I think it's very much possible, but it depends on the kind of society you organize and the kind of education that goes along with that society.
So you mentioned, and so I want to ask a more personal question. You mentioned education a lot. So I want to ask you, in your life, what was the scholar or organization or literature that began to shape your mentality and cause you to develop this point of view that you currently have? Like, what was that first thing that caused you to nudge and started to kind of change your perspective and your mentality?
Education, definitely, the type of education that I had, not so much what I got in school. What I got from my formal school, elementary education and so forth, is the ability to read. They gave me some of the fundamentals, and I would always show my gratitude and appreciation to those teachers who provided that for me. They gave me the fundamental, you know, they teach me to fish, and then I was able to fish, and then I started fishing in a particular kind of in a particular arena. My first kind of interest in African consciousness and movement, African movement thing, actually began as a young boy in the islands. You would hear about the civil rights movement. You would see old newspapers, and when you hear about how your people, this was our people here in America. When you see pictures and you see how they were beaten and how they were treated, that's the first thing to me that really started to open my consciousness and my mind towards, you know, sort of African consciousness, Black power, Pan-Africanism, kinds of worldview and philosophy. the first thing was this movement, I think, in America. And that's how to open my eyes. And then, of course, I started to look home. And then you start to see the racism and the exploitation and the inequality and so forth. And those things, of course, helped to propel my thinking. And then, of course, started to read, I think started reading things like Kwame Nkrumah, Walter Rodney. Those Malcolm X autobiography was one of the earlier things that we read. And those books, the literature started to get me. And then I went to City College, right, in New York. And I took a African history course. It was African history pre-European, right? And this is it. I went into the course, and for the first time in my life, I'm hearing about all these great African civilizations, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, and so forth. And it blew my mind. So that was one of the things that really, really put me in this direction. That course, that first African history course that I took, it just blew my mind. I had no idea that African people had done all these great things. And I think that was the tipping point there for me. And since then, I just started to read as much as possible, attend as many educational forums and programs existing. I didn't wait just for the educational institutions. There are a lot of educational things going on in your society, in your community, and I think you ought to take advantage of them. So whenever people come to town and make an important presentation, I definitely would attend, things like that. And then, then interacting with others who are others who have been farther along the path than me. Whenever I had an opportunity to interact with them, I would do so. I know I talked with you about Ivan Van Sertima, for example. I was in a class with Ivan Van Sertima at City College in New York, right?
Wow.
And the class was so mind-blowing to me that every week I used to walk with him from City College campus. He was living in New Jersey, so he would go down to the subway on 135th Street. And I take every opportunity to walk with him and just getting, questioning him all the time, things like that I would do. Walter Rodney, the first time I saw Rodney was in New York also. And he was on his way from Tanzania to Guyana. And he stopped in New York and he made a presentation at City College, and I went there. And after that, a small group of us went to a Cuban restaurant to have lunch. I was there following him. And then later that night, he was presenting in Greenwich Village in New York, and I went and I was taping all this stuff, right? And so every opportunity that I get for these kinds of experiences, I took advantage of those. So those are the things that get me to where I'm at this point.
I remember the first time you told me that you actually, and I think you said that when you first met Van Sertima, he was in the middle of working on They Came Before Columbus, correct?
Right, that's correct.
Correct. And I know for me, the thing that opened me up was my 10th grade history teacher. Sometimes I would goof off in class, and so I had to stay back with detention. And he just, after school, the conversations we would have about world history were a lot different. He was the first person, his name was Arthur Peebles. And he was the first person to talk to me about the Moors. And when he got into the Moors, that blew me away. But furthermore, he told me to read this book called They Came Before Columbus. So I was like 16. I went and read it, didn't really have a good contextual understanding. Then I read it later again when I came in your class. I read it. And then I read it again later on in my late 20s. And so, that book really, it blew me away. It opened my mind. And that's why I said education, to your point, and I believe it as well, education and just that African-centered perspective, it can do wonders. It's done wonders for people like, Malcolm X. He was exposed to different types of information. It did wonders for Dr. John Henry Clark when he was exposed to different types of information. So we've seen the transformative effect that this history and this political frame of mind has had on various people. And speaking on the education aspect, this is something that, we have spoke about. In today's current climate, a lot of people are saying if you're going to college, make sure you go into STEM. If you're going to the university, make sure that you're getting a degree in STEM because it's going to be lucrative. I want to ask you, as a historian, as a scholar, and a professor in African American history, African and African studies, throughout the past few decades. Currently, what do you think the future is like for African American studies, considering that so many people are focused on, especially in the Black community? I've seen people make videos about, hey, don't go into humanities, don't worry about history, go into STEM. What's the movement from here for African American studies?
I agree with the STEM. I think both are equally important. I think the STEM area is definitely invaluable, given the world that we are living in now, definitely invaluable. But also the African American studies is equally invaluable because, what the right African American studies program can do is give you that kind of ideology, give you the ideology that can guide your behavior, guide how you use your STEM education. You could end up using your STEM education for powerful countries or powerful corporations that exploits your people, continue to exploit your people, right? Or you can end up using the STEM education to work towards making Africa similar to like a China. I'm not saying it got to be this, identical to China, but bringing Africa to the point where it is not impoverished like it is right.
Yeah, so we were discussing just the issue of STEM. And one of the things you were talking about, and this is something like earlier when we were talking about these different perspectives on Pan-Africanism. And one of the things that I'm an advocate of, and I actually believe that even if you are doing STEM, you can still do it from an African-centered perspective. You can use that knowledge in STEM to provide less oppressive alternatives. And also another point that I feel like a lot of us don't speak about is the environment, the environmental aspect that's a product of constant exploitation, constant profit. And so, you can actually use that knowledge in a different capacity. So I just want you to continue. How can we practically use even STEM fields and still value the discipline of African American studies?
I think, well, once you're exposed to the African Studies academic program, once you've been exposed to that, right, at least in an appropriate way, in a way that is African-centered. I like to use the words progressive and working class oriented. If you have been exposed to that and you embrace most of what that perspective advocates, then it seems to me that you will look at how you will always be looking at how you will use that STEM education to advance the interests, of your people, of your nation, of your people. That sort of thing. But to me, it's so critical. It is so critical that you get that that African studies education, that African-centered education. That says everything. Because I think a lot of we would have issues anyway because of the society in which we live, the world in which we live. We would have issues. It's a very much capitalist, imperialist, dominated world, and and they go at everything is about money and profit and material things. It's about a kind of lifestyle that is not conducive to promoting love and respect for your fellow human beings.
Yeah.
This kind of society. I mean, yeah, they might every once in a while, around certain times, certain holidays, they might try to promote that kind of thing. But generally throughout the year, it's about making money and profit and that kind of thing. The minute you start making profit in a capitalist society, then capitalism dies. If a bank stop making profit, then the bank goes out of business. A whole same thing.
Yeah.
So it's all profit driven, and not the concern about the well-being of human being is secondary, if not tertiary, in many instances. So my thing, the main thing for me is to have that education. A lot of it right now can come from self-education. We're not, like I said, you are being bombarded every minute, every hour with this capitalist philosophy, this capitalist value system, this capitalist world view, and the only counter to that is you begin to find a way to try to self-educate from a progressive, from an alternative progressive standpoint, which means there are certain persons that you're going to read, there are certain literature you're going to look for and read and study. You might get into study groups with certain people and that kind of thing. But if you don't have that counter, then there's no way you can get away from all this constant onslaught of information that embraces and promotes capitalism, and that's what makes it so difficult for so many of our people. It makes it difficult, and it's even more difficult now because we talk about the traditional media and how it's controlled by these mega conglomerates, capitalist conglomerates, but the new social media is very similar. Again, a small number of companies also control most of the internet service providers, small number of companies. And so it makes it's like a sort of stranglehold that they have over you, and it makes it difficult to get away from that. Some of us who've been around a little while, who are older and been around a little while, where we came up in a different environment, I think it's important that a lot of the younger generation connect with some of us so that we can share our experiences, of them with them. Because coming up in this environment where we are today, it's very challenging and difficult to get around and get this alternative kind of information that you need to counter this constant onslaught of capitalism, love of materialism, love of money, and this ideology that you can get from a serious African studies program will help us in so many ways, right? Pan-Africanist, African-centered, it makes us think of our people. It teaches us that whatever we enjoy today, rights and benefits, is a direct result of the sacrifices and work of our people. So it means that we have some responsibility and obligation to our community and our people. It tells you that. If you get that kind of education, Hoyt, a lot of this violence, and you see it all over just in our communities. I mean, this insane violence where a lot of our younger people, Bell Hooks wrote about that, where she talked about the young people doing that. She said young people need to talk to some of the older men who are not killing each other like that, right? But again, because of this lack of this African-centered, Pan-Africanist type philosophy or value system, ideology, I think is one of the things responsible for this violence that you find. And it's not just in Richmond or New York or Atlanta. It's in Jamaica, it's in Trinidad, it's in Puerto Rico big time, South Africa is big, and it's among the in African communities. If you look in when I look around here in Richmond, most of the time when I see violence and people getting killed is African people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the state of Virginia, Africans are a minority. Africans are not a majority in the state of Virginia. Okay, you go to a place like Jamaica, Trinidad,
Yeah.
Puerto Rico, right? The majority of Africans, with Jamaica and Trinidad in particular, the majority of African people, you have the same violence, young people especially, a lot of violence, people being killed. So whether we are a minority or majority environment, we're just killing each other like crazy. And I think part of it is this lack of Pan-Africanist ideology to guide our behavior, tell us who we are, where we came from, the responsibility that we have because of who we are and that sort of thing. All those kind of things will come out of that kind of education. And
So,
because our youngsters are not exposed to that, they just out there, they embrace this crazy capitalist value system, and this is how they lead to this killing themselves just like that.
so I wanna ask two questions, and I think I'm gonna ask this first because it's touching on what you just spoke about. I've had people say when it comes to the education aspect, like they can understand learning about, let's say, the civil rights movement, learning about Reconstruction, Black Wall Street. If you're looking at different movements that happen in, Guyana or Jamaica or Haiti or Haiti, they can understand that. But then I've heard people say, well, why is it important for me to sit up and learn about Mali or ancient Ghana or Kaneem Borno or Kemet? Like, why is that important too? So could you explain like the importance of us studying these societies in antiquity? Like, where does that fit in this part of the puzzle?
Well, it fits. We need to look at those societies, and we need to look not just at the great accomplishments, but we need to look at the educational system. We need to look at the value system, and we need to know. We need African history, because without African history, we will never be able to understand the injury and damage inflicted upon us by chattel slavery system.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know the extent of that damage without a knowledge of African history, because African history tell us who we are, what we were doing before we were enslaved in America, right? So it tells us that, yes, in Africa, we were running our own economies. It tells us when you look at Ghana, Mali, and Shanghai, that coming out of Ghana, Mali, and Shanghai was the system, the currency upon which the known world at that time, monetary system was based upon. Our people were the one who would develop that system with the gold extraction and the gold production system that you had in Ghana, Mali, and Shanghai. That gold was used as the base of the economic system in Europe, in Asia, and in Africa, right? Because basically they tell us that, we were slave and we were inferior, we were uncivilized, we haven't done anything great. So we have to begin with Africa and see that we were people who were free people, running our own economy, running our own society, systems of government we created and administered. We had a unique culture, right? In fact, it was Amy Cisse, who's from Martinique, and one of the main co-founders of Negritude. Amy Cisse said, one cannot know the West Indies if one does not know Africa. Knowing Africa allowed me to know my country, which is Martinique, better. You could do the same thing for America. One cannot know African America if one does not know Africa, right?
Mm.
For example, I think most would agree that the black church in America is different, is a little different the way you worship than the white church in America, right? It's a little different. What makes the black church different? You got to go to Africa. You understand Africa. In the black church, there might be dance, religious dance, there might be music, there might be speaking in tongues. When you look at traditional African ways of worshiping, right? The rituals, the worship, and so forth, you find the spirit possession that explains the speaking in tongues part right here in these churches there. African, if you take the Ifa religion, right? You have music. You have the family of drums, the bata drums, the mother, the father, and the child, right? Each orisha, there's a particular rhythm for each orisha, right? You have the herbs that goes with each orisha also, which is something again, the alternative medicine that all people use. So what I'm saying is that knowing Africa helps you to understand African American culture better. Even the language. The Europeans were telling us that because we were ignorant and inferior and uncivilized and dumb, we couldn't learn the English language. Well, all we were doing was, but this happened to any people who learn a new language. We were bringing our traditional languages and fusing it with these new European languages and creating this kind of new hybrid language. And so all we did was carry over some of the transfers from the traditional African languages into, what some people call Ebonics. You carry over some of the same things, right? So when you look at Ebonics, you look at a lot of African grammar in Ebonics, right? Even the phonology, some of the songs and so forth, comes from African traditional languages. Well, when people tell you Ebonics they make fun of Ebonics and they ridicule it and so forth. Again, if you know Africa, you know that that's not so. You know that, Ebonics, any other people learning a new language, they bring transfers from the old language into the new language, whether it be the songs, the grammar, or other aspect, the semantics, the syntax, the elements from that old language you bring, and that's what African did in this country, right? But they tell us we were dumb. They say this is bad English, which is not bad English. Linguists like Dr. Arnie Smith tells us plain that this is a language where you have what you call a re-lexified African language, where the vocabulary is European, but the grammar is African. So it's important, like I said, to learn about Africa, to understand what happened to us here during enslavement. The psychological damage. When we were in Africa, we know who we were as our identity. We members of different African nations, they are Khan, they are Shanti, they are Yoruba, the Igbo, the Hausa, you name it. Once we come here, they're telling us we were what? Negro, colored, this, that, the other, and we began, so we have this identity confusion is one of the damage of chattel slavery to our people, this identity confusion. We no longer know who we were, and that sort of thing. Inferiority complex, right? We need the African background because of what happened during chattel slavery. We were told that, the color black complexion is ugly. Our natural roll-up curly hair is bad hair, and that sort of thing. And again, we need to go back to Africa and see that in Africa, we didn't look at black as being ugly and negative until white folks come and start to promote that kind of thing. So the African background is critical. It's critical. Otherwise, if we begin just with America, And we begin at a very low point. We begin as enslaved persons. We begin.
Yeah.
We begin in America. And we begin in Africa. We begin not just as kings and queens, like a lot of people like to point out to, because Walter Rodney says that a lot of us like to just single out the great African kingdoms and empires and so forth. But he said the vast majority of African people did not live in those empires. And that's where a lot of the wholesome values of African people can be found, in these villages out in the rural areas and so forth. So we need to study not just only the important civilizations, but we need to study, the entire African continent for sure. But definitely, I agree with Amy to say that knowing Africa allow me to know my culture and my country better in the Caribbean where I was born, right?
Yeah.
Whether you talk about music, cuisine, and so forth, all those things you understand because the roots of them are in Africa. And the slave master told us all those things were inferior, were bad, were negative. Our cultural cuisine, right? Our cultural cultural languages, our dress. That's about everything about us culturally. He said we're inferior, was negative, and so you find many of us wanting to be like the slave master. In fact, Dr. Joy DeGroot, post-traumatic syndrome, slave syndrome, say that we incorporated the ideology of the slave master into our psyche during slavery. So again, we have been damaged severely. And then people talk about reparation. Reparation is to repair a people, to bring them back to the status that existed before they were injured, before they were damaged. We don't know the status that we enjoy if we don't know Africa.
Yeah.
We don't want to go back to, if you go back just to America, you go back to enslavement. We don't want to go back to enslavement. We want to go back to before enslavement, which means you got to go back to Africa. And you look, like I said, at those great, great communities, great cultures, great educational institutions. I mean, university, Timbuktu, Sankari, and so forth.
Yeah, I think, and see, that's where I think when you study these institutions, even when in Job's book in pre-colonial Black Africa, one of the things that Job did, he broke down how the teachers and the scholars in Mali and Timbuktu were actually compensated by the people. And it wasn't just this idea of greed, but the people appreciated what the scholar and the teacher gave within that particular community. But really quick before we leave, I asked you this. If you could have like 10 or 15 books that you, but before you name the 10 or 15 books that you have that you want to list, could you also, people that watch this, if they want to maybe find follow you, or if you have an email, if they have any questions, do you have like an email that they can contact you at if they may want to get more book recommendations or something like that?
Yeah, the email is sadeyemi1@comcast.net. That's sadeyemi1@comcast.net. SADEYEMI1@comcast.net.
Okay, folks. So if you once you see these books, if you have some inquiries or you want a few more book recommendations, definitely reach out. So with that said, Professor Adeyemi, one of the books, I don't know if actually I do. Hold on. So this is a book that you put me on to, and I love it. I done read it cover to cover. When We Rule by Robin Walker.
Yeah, yes.
So
it's a very good book.
I'll tell anybody, I won't say it's the best book on pre-colonial African history, but I will say it's a very thoroughly researched and well-written book.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to set it off with that. And the floor is yours, Professor Adeyemi.
That's good. That's one, definitely that's one they need to get. Okay, this is, let me see. Can you see it?
Yeah, okay, now I can see it. Okay.
Okay, let me see. Oh.
Yeah, I can see it now. Yeah, right there. That's good. Right there. Yep.
Yeah,
that's good.
The Origin of a Civil Rights Movement, Allen B. Morris. I ran into this book in New York in my brother's house, and I lent it from it. And he bought this one from me. But this book is out of sight. It is great, and it shows you, because a lot of time when we think of the civil rights, we think of Martin Luther King only, but they show you all the grassroots people and organizations, and it's a fantastic book. And they show you where the origin of a lot of the organizational work and strategies came from with this. So it's a fantastic book. And that's the Origins of a Civil Rights Movement by Alden Morris. And I think he's still alive also. Then of course this is post-traumatic.
I've read that one.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome. Yes, this is a very interesting book, and when you read it, you don't want to stop. When I read it, I didn't want to stop at all. You know, I'm a Rodney fan. But I have many books on Rodney. Many books and many things, most things that he's written and so forth. But this is by Rupert Lewis, right? He's a Jamaican scholar, Jamaican Ghanaian. He's one of the great Ghanaian scholars, Rupert Lewis. This book here is, I mean, it is great. It is one of the best. It is the best book on Walter Rodney out there. This is another fantastic. This is on John Henry Clark. John Henry Clark by Ahati N. Toure. I think he's up at Delaware State University. This book here is the best book on Dr. Clark. I wish someone could do someone like this, and Dr. Ben Yekinen. But this book is more than just Dr. Clark. It gives you a history of the kind of independent activities that Black scholars and Black activists did, because they were shut out from all these white institutions. They did their own research. They come together, share the research. It's fantastic. This, of course, is the next Rodney. How Europe underdeveloped is.
I've read that. Yep.
This book changed. This book is a classic. It changed how we look at Africa in universities and in the world. Change how we look at Africa, because before this book, they used to say that Africa was poor because African people were inferior, uncivilized, backward, and so forth.
Yeah.
Rodney show you why Africa became impoverished.
Could I just interject something about that book? It helped for me when I read How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. I read it a few years ago, and I actually had it, but I lost the book. I don't know what happened to it. For me, it provided a very detailed breakdown that can explain the conditions that we see in Africa post-slave trade. In that period, post-slave trade before the Berlin Conference, and even the conditions that we see in some parts of Africa today, because a lot of times what I've heard explained by people that are kind of like have an anti-African perspective is that Africa, the way it is just because there's bad leadership, the people aren't astute enough to govern themselves. And Rodney really provides a really great, thorough, well-researched breakdown of what transpired to cause the current state of Africa. So I just wanted to add that in there. That's how it hit me.
Good, very good. This is a small book, but it's really an excellent book on Malcolm X.
Hold it up a little bit more. Okay, good. Yeah.
It's by William Sales Jr. But it is an excellent book on Malcolm X. It is concise in all the little sections, but it's one of the best on Malcolm X. This is Cedric Robinson,
Okay.
Black Marxism. This is a classic.
Okay.
This is a classic. He talks about the Black radical tradition. And it's I mean, it's perhaps, this is essential. It's essential. Because it gave you, you know, even though the title says Black Marxism, that's not what it's about at all. He's basically saying that black folks have a radical tradition that goes all the way back. And he goes all the way back and comes forward to the present and looking at people like CLR James, Dubois, and all those, you know, as this black radical tradition that has nothing to do with white scholars at all, Marx or any of them.
And can you say the name of that author again of that book?
Cedric Robinson. Cedric Robinson.
Cedric Robinson. Okay.
Yeah, I actually have a little. This is on him itself. This is a recent book on him.
Okay.
He's a giant. He was a giant here in America.
Mhm.
One of the top-notch African American scholars.
Gotcha.
Highly respected.
Okay.
Okay. And then, Black Power for sure is by Amos Wilson. This is a very big book, but this book is great because some of the questions that we dealt with in the conversation, Hoy,
Mm-hmm.
it tells you, it gives you all kinds of ideas of operating in this capitalist society right now. Operating in a way where, again, you're looking out, you're advancing black people's interests. Not just coming a blind capitalist into making money and living like a big celebrity. But so a nice alternative, whether it be investment and you name it, is fantastic. And it came out soon after. He was working hard to finish this book, and he died before the book finished, I think. And it came out after he died. But this is Amos Wilson who wrote all those books on blacks and violence and so forth, and black children. Yeah. And then for music, I know we didn't talk about music tonight, but perhaps the best book on African American music. This scholar here, she died also. Eileen Sutton, she was a top-notch scholar, worked at Harvard University, and it covers all spectrum of black music. I mean, it's a classic again, right?
Awesome.
The music of Black Americans, the history. This is the third edition by Eileen Sutton.
Okay.
Fantastic book. And then, of course, this is Obenga. Obenga.
Yeah, yeah.
This book here, he really breaks it down in a nice fashion. Philosophy, science, all of it is a great book by Obenga.
I have that book. I also have another smaller book by Obenga. I think it's called like Black Egypt.
Egypt, yeah, that's good also. Yeah,
yeah, that's a
good,
real small one. Yeah,
but this one is really, yeah. This is. And then of course we do Diop Civilization of Barbarism by Diop. As you know, Diop is top notch, top ranking. Civilization of Barbarism. And this book by this white sociologist is one of the best books I've ever read on racism. Systemic racism.
Okay.
It's fantastic. He's a sociologist, Joe Fagan. He worked at some of the top universities in this country also, but this book here is a must. It's excellent. And then the last one I'll put, because this one is by this, I haven't read all of this yet, but it's by a woman, Nicole Paulette, and it has to do with it gives you this information on cybersecurity, the fifth domain cyber. And to me, if you are an activist, you need to understand it, because one thing we didn't talk about is that if being an activist, I've looked at books that look at how those who want to keep exploiting and keep African people oppressed, how while you are strategizing and trying to advance as an African activist, trying to advance the interests of African people, those who are against us, powerful forces who are against us, whether it be governments, individuals, corporations, they're working overtime to come up with strategies to keep us divided. For example, the national, you might find this on the internet also, the national memorandum put out by Brzezinski, who was head of national security under President Carter. Yeah, when you look at that, you see how they come up with strategies to keep Africans in the continent divided and pit them against Africans in the diaspora. You have War at Home by Brian Glick.
Okay.
And that looks at how the FBI and the CIA and so forth have used all kind of dirty tricks against the Black Panthers, Kwame Ture, Black movements, and that sort of thing. So we also have to look, educate ourselves about the tactics and strategy and means used by those who are against us to destroy our organizations, pit us against each other, and that sort of thing. That should be part of our education also, not just the greatness about Africa and so forth, but looking at those who are fighting to keep us apart and keep us down, keep us suppressed, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's thank you for providing your reading list. I hope if you saw anything that you want to check out, definitely, I think you may be able to find that at, some of those books at Barnes and Noble, or if you need to, you might have to go on Amazon and order it. Or if you're in the DC area, you can stop at Sankofa Books. They may carry some of those books as well. Once again, I want to thank you, Professor Adeyemi, for coming on the show today. I think this is a powerful episode. I think, people will learn a whole lot from this episode. And once again, just give the people your email again, in case they may want to contact you with a few inquiries.
Yes, it's S, that's capital S, ADEYEMI 1 at Comcast.net. Adeyemi1 at Comcast.net. I don't know if you can you see it on the screen?
Actually, you can as well. So I'm sorry. You can see it.
Email.
You can see it on the screen. So if you see the email there on the screen. And once again, Professor Adeyemi, thank you for joining this episode today. Deeply appreciate it. And once again, this has been episode 85 of No Truths Barred. If you've missed any of the previous episodes, they are available on Spotify, and some of them are available on YouTube. I keep trying to get those audios up, but things keep coming up, and I'm going to try to get all of the audios up on YouTube as well. Also, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, which is the No Truths Barred YouTube channel as well. And follow the Instagram page, which is the THE_No Truths Barred podcast. And thank you for tuning in to this episode. Much love. Take care. Until next time. Peace.